Welcome. This is James Corbett of the Corbett Report with your eye-opener report for BoilingFrogsPost.com. In the days of hysteria immediately following the Boston bombing, an unlikely media darling emerged. Ruslan Tsarni, the alleged bomber's uncle, known to the press as Uncle Ruslan, gained notoriety for the ferocity with which he denounced his own nephews and their alleged Islamic radicalism.
What do you think provoked this?
Being losers, hatred to those who were able to settle themselves. These are the only reasons I can imagine of.
These brothers are wanted for killing 3 people and maiming dozens of others.
Come on, guys, I know, just been watching it. I've been reading it. The people who did it, they do not deserve even existing on this earth. They do not deserve to exist on this earth. That's what I think.
It isn't hard to see why the press focused so closely on Uncle Ruslan. He said precisely what the so-called authorities wanted to hear about the suspects, in precisely the way they wanted to hear it. Compare this to the coverage of the boy's mother in the mainstream media. After revealing the FBI's connection to the Tsarnaev brothers, causing the Bureau to reluctantly confirm that they had in fact investigated Tamerlan in the past, she has been alternatively smeared and dismissed by those same media outlets which have refused to delve into the FBI connection. But even more interesting than the sudden popularity of Uncle Ruslan is his background and ties to other organizations. In an official SEC filing from 2005, it was revealed that Ruslan Tsarni had worked as a consultant for USAID, ostensibly an independent federal agency, which is little more than an adjunct of the US State Department and is a known front for deep-cover CIA agents in various geostrategic corners of the globe. At the same time in the mid-1990s, Tsarni incorporated a company called the Congress of Chechen International Organizations, which recently unearthed documents show was providing material support to Chechen terrorists, including Sheikh Fathi, who, according to U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald, was a military commander in the violent jihadist movement in Chechnya and a preacher of violent jihad. As investigative reporter Daniel Hopsicker has demonstrated, the address for the Congress of Chechen International Organizations just happened to be the home address of Graham E. Fuller, formerly vice chairman of the Reagan-era CIA's National Intelligence Council. The relationship between Ruslan and this former top CIA official was not a loose one. Tsarni married Fuller's daughter in the mid-1990s and lived in Fuller's home for some time, basing his terror-supporting organization under Fuller's own roof. Fuller himself has an interesting background that includes his 2-decade stint with the Central Intelligence Agency. During that time, he served as National Intelligence Officer for Near East and South Asia. One of his most notorious acts during that time was penning a memo that, according to the New York Times, later became the basis for the Iran-Contra scandal. In addition, Fuller has long made the argument that Islam is a potentially useful geopolitical tool for the United States to manipulate for their own ends. He has been quoted as saying, "The policy of guiding the evolution of Islam and of helping them against our adversaries worked marvelously well in Afghanistan against the Russians. The same doctrines can still be used to destabilize what remains of Russian power, and especially to counter the Chinese influence in Central Asia." Fuller's ties also extend to the network of Imam Fethullah Gulen, an Islamic preacher who was run out of Turkey for allegations of conspiracy to overthrow the secular government. Gulen ended up in Pennsylvania, where he now oversees a vast organization known as the Gulen Movement, which has over $20 billion at its disposal for setting up Islamic schools in over 100 countries. Being a wanted man by the Turkish government, Gulen did not just waltz into the US and gain immediate residency. Instead, he fought a protracted legal battle that included reference letters from well-connected political figures, including none other than Graham Fuller.
And in a similar vein, the Gulen movement, which many of you have heard of undoubtedly, is the biggest social movement based on religious values in Turkey today, with huge infrastructure, educational infrastructure, devoting lots of attention to education, communications, publications, and schools now in perhaps over 100 countries of the world, including in the United States, and has many centers, including here in Texas, and indeed Many of the lectures that I've been giving here have been part of the cooperation with the various Gulen-affiliated organizations.
Since the details of Fuller's connection to the Boston bombing suspect's uncle emerged, Fuller has admitted the connection, but dismissed the suggestion that there is any link between the CIA and the Boston bombing case as absurd. Late last month, it was revealed that Tamerlan Tsarnaev had attended a workshop last year sponsored by the CIA-linked Jamestown Foundation. Late last month, Sybil Edmonds appeared on the Lou Rockwell Show to discuss the coincidence of Fuller's connection to this case.
Graham Fuller retired from the CIA about maybe 10, 15 years ago, but he has still been working as contractor with the CIA. Now, if people believe in coincidences, even those people right now would pause and say, first, they exposed that the brothers were active with Jamestown Foundation CIA fund. Then comes the fact that the uncle, who was the first person, and that would make it very legitimate, even their own uncle comes out and says these guys are radical Islamists, right? Well, that uncle happens to be the ex-son-in-law of one of the top CIA operatives in the region. Now, even people who believe in coincidences would pause and say, there can't be. There's no way that you would have this kind of coincidence. Well, even the documents surfaced, even though we had the coverage, you will not see this being covered or played out in the U.S. mainstream media because the uncle is part of the official narrative. Now, as with Graham Fuller, this is very interesting, Lou, because about 6-7 years ago, I released a list of about 15, 20 Americans, U.S. officials, both from elected officials but also appointed individuals. And these individuals, with their names appeared in other sites, but I just put their pictures. I said, well, the state secrets privilege puts a gag order and says, I cannot talk about the FBI targets, okay, in terms of the U.S. persons, officials involved in these terror activities, including the stuff with bin Laden and 9/11. However, I'm just putting these pictures out, and I'm putting a name, and I'm going to name it my State Secrets Privilege Gallery. Well, anybody who was familiar with my case, anybody who was following the case with all the gag orders, they knew immediately this was one way put out there and for people to know who were the people involved in my case and why the state secrets privilege invocation. This was in 2007, end of 2007, early 2008 that this documents went out to people. If you look at that list, you will see Graham Fuller there, okay? Now, Graham Fuller's name just came out, and nobody in the U.S. has ever really heard of him except for some of the books he's written talking about how actually moderate Islam can be very good in that part of the world, etc., which is his fund, because he's also active within the academia here in the United States. But nobody had really seen this guy's significance. Now, I put out this name, and people look and say, why would he put this guy from CIA, Graham Fuller? Well, guess what? Graham Fuller happens to be the ex-father-in-law of the uncle for the Boston terror attacks. After we put out this information and some alternative sources, Graham Fuller went to the media and said, yes, he was married to my daughter and they got divorced, but to say that there is any link between these suspects and the CIA would be absolutely absurd. Well, of course, that's what he would say. Now, further documents surfaced yesterday showing that not only that, the uncle lived with him, and this is Graham Fuller, in Graham Fuller's Maryland house for over 1 year in Rockville, Maryland, okay? So it was not just a casual, he was the son-in-law and then they got divorced. No, even after divorce, this man lived in Graham Fuller's address in his house and used Graham Fuller's address as his official address in 1990s, okay? Again, you won't see this being mentioned at all within the mainstream media.
A narrative has begun to emerge from the background noise of the Boston bombing story that paints a very different picture from what we have been told. We have the uncle of the bombing suspects emerging as a media darling for his denunciation of the brothers, who just so happens to have worked with US aid and was living and working at the home of a top CIA official who has actually advocated guiding the evolution of Islam to destabilize Russia and China in Central Asia. Now we have several of the pieces of the puzzle that Edmonds predicted in the past few weeks falling into place. That the bombers were likely being run by the CIA, that the event would bring focus on radical terrorists who have hitherto been painted as freedom-fighting allies of the US, and that the case may be used as leverage to make new inroads on the Syria standoff between Washington and Moscow. And several of the pieces of this puzzle revolve around Graham E. Fuller, former National Intelligence Officer for Near East and South Asia, a proponent of political Islam, an inspiration for the Iran-Contra affair, a character reference for CIA darling Fethullah Gulen, a former RAND analyst, and the father-in-law of the Boston bomber's uncle. So what else is there to be uncovered regarding Fuller's background and activities? For the answer to this, you'll have to stay tuned to alternative researchers like Edmonds and Hopsicker, and tune out the corporate media, which hasn't dared to even broach the question. This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information on this and other topics, please go to BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information and commentary from James Corbett, please go to CorbettReport.com.